Good day, everyone. Yeah, I want to discuss a topic that I was thinking about this past week. That it's interesting how the reason I started thinking about this topic was because you know like earlier in the week or maybe last week I made a joke, and I was thinking about how um, some people kind of respond negatively to jokes and to humor and to various forms of humor. And I was thinking about how people can get offended really easily, and everybody's kind of got brain works a little bit differently. Everybody's kind of got their core values, their core ideas, their core thoughts of themselves, and everybody's got their biases, and everybody's brain works a little bit differently. It's just kind of like everybody looks a little bit differently. Everybody's brain works a little differently, and it's kind of been an interesting scenario. Like throughout the course of my life, I've always been one to kind of look for humor in things, and there. In some ways that's a good thing, and in some ways that people, there's certain individuals that um, don't find humor. They kind of take a kind of a negative route in terms of the humor, and they rather than laugh, they get offended. And there's certain things that cause me to get offended, and I'm not going to go over that at the moment because there's probably going to be some people that are struggling that'll probably try to use that against me. And so, but I just I was thinking about this topic, and could try to learn some ways to improve my own um, you know um, when, like get less offended, and how to respond more positively to interpreting the world around me. So a question I was like using AI for this, I do frequently, but so I asked a question, and the question is, why do we get offended so easily? And the answer is we get offended so easily because the human brain is built to overdetect threats, especially social ones, and modern life amplifies that wiring. The core driver is negativity bias, the tendency to prioritize potential danger or criticism over neutral or positive signals. This makes even small comments feel disproportionately personal. Why the brain reacts so strongly? Negativity bias. Our brains latch onto criticism more than praise because evolutionarily, noticing threats kept us alive. Today, that same wiring makes a mild remark feel like an attack. Amygdala activation, the brain's threat center, reacts before rational thinking kicks in, especially when we feel insecure or stressed. Cognitive distortions. We often misinterpret neutral comments as hostile due to assumptions, mind reading, or catastrophizing. Emotional and psychological factors. Insecurity and low self esteem. When we're unsure of ourselves, even harmless remarks can feel like personal attacks. This is one of the strongest predictors of being easily offended. Unhealed past experiences. Old wounds, criticism, neglect, or shame make us hypersensitive to anything that resembles past hurt. Identity threat. If a comment touches on something tied to our identity, beliefs, values, appearance, we react negative or react defensively. Social and cultural amplifiers. Social media magnifies criticism. One negative comment outweighs dozens of positive ones because our brains fixate on the threat. Anonymity online, people who are more rude or blunt when they don't face consequences, increasing the chances we'll feel attacked. Emotional contagion, being surrounded by negativity, news, online discourse, stressed people makes us more reactive ourselves. Polarized culture. We live in an age of outrage where taking offense is socially reinforced and sometimes rewarded. the deeper pattern tying it all together. Across all these factors, the common thread is perceived threat to safety, identity, ego, or belonging. When something feels like a threat, even subtly, the brain reacts as if it must defend itself. In other words, we get offended easily because our brains are threat detection machines living in a world full of ambiguous signals. What actually helps? If you want, I can break down. Here, I want to go further with the step-by-step becoming harder to offend, and how people, including myself, can become harder to offend. Answer: becoming harder to offend is less about toughening up and more about changing how you interpret and respond to things. Here's a practical, repeatable path you can actually use in real situations. Notice the first emotional spike. Catch the moment you feel that that flash of hurt, anger, or defensiveness before you act on it. Pause for 3 slow breaths before replying, posting, or walking away. Silently label it: I feel hurt, I feel attacked, or I feel disrespected. Remind yourself, a feeling is data, not a command. Ask what feels threatened. Identify whether the comment hit your ego, your values, your identity, or an old wound. Ask yourself, what part of me is this poking at? Intelligence, competence, appearance, beliefs, etc. Notice if this feeling is familiar from past experiences, family, school, or relationships. Write a 1-sentence answer. I'm offended because this makes me feel. Separate intention from impact. Key skill. Most offense comes from assuming bad intentions that we haven't actually confirmed. Ask yourself, what are 3 non-malicious reasons they might have said this? Consider, they might be clumsy, joking badly, stressed, or unaware, not attacking you. Remind yourself you do not actually know their inner motives. Decide to stay curious instead of certain. Maybe I'm not seeing the full picture yet. Reframe the comment as informative, not a verdict. Treat what was said as one data point, not a final truth about you. Ask, is this 100% true, partly true, or not true at all? If there's a grain of truth, extract it as feedback and discard the sting. If it's not true, remind yourself, their words describe them more than they describe me. That's interesting. Their words describe them more than they describe me. Choose your response on purpose. Instead of reacting, decide whether this moment deserves your energy and a response. Option 1, let it go when it's minor, unintentional, or from somebody who doesn't really matter. And I think the majority of these fall into, a lot of times people feel offended by people they don't even know. They don't know them. Option 2, clarify. Hey, when you said X, I took it as Y. Was that what you mean? Was that what you meant? Option 3, set a boundary if it's a pattern. I'm not okay with jokes, comments like that. Option 4, exit the interaction if it's clearly disrespectful and not worth engaging. Build a thicker skin by strengthening your identity. The more grounded you are in who you are, the less power random comments have over you. Regularly list things you respect about yourself that no one can take away. Spend more time with people who see and affirm your better qualities. Invest in skills, habits, and goals that make you proud of yourself, independent of others' opinions. Practice micro exposures to discomfort. Gradually expose yourself to mild criticism or disagreement so your system stops treating it as danger. Invite honest feedback from someone you trust and just listen without defending. Read opinions you disagree with and practice saying, interesting, I see it differently. After each exposure note, I felt uncomfortable, but nothing actually bad happened. Growth loop. Review and learn after triggering moments. Use each offended moment as a rep to get better at staying grounded next time. Later ask, what exactly set me off? And where did I overreact? Identify which step you skipped, pause, intention check, reframe, etc. Decide one small thing you'll do differently in the next similar situation. Give yourself credit for any tiny improvement, not just perfection. The more you run this sequence, pause, examine, reframe, choose, the less the world can jerk your emotions around. If you want, we can walk through a real situation you've been offended by and apply these steps in detail. So I asked a question, and I don't know if I'm like asking the right questions, but this is a question I asked. Like, is it possible to decrease amygdala activity, the fear center part of the brain, and over responses to perceived threats? And the answer is yes. It is possible to decrease amygdala activity and the overreactive threat response. And there's a solid neuroscience behind how to do it. The amygdala isn't fixed. It's highly trainable. What you're really asking is whether you can rewire your threat detection system so it stops firing too fast and too intensely. The answer is yes, and the mechanisms are well studied. Here's a concise takeaway. You can reduce amygdala activity by strengthening the prefrontal cortex, lowering baseline stress, and retraining your brain's interpretation of threat. Below is a structured breakdown of what actually works, why it works, and what changes in the brain. Strengthening the prefrontal cortex reduces amygdala overactivation. The prefrontal cortex is the braking system for the amygdala. When the PFC is stronger, it sends inhibitory signals that calm the threat response. Proven ways to strengthen PFC control, prefrontal cortex control. Mindfulness meditation. 8 weeks of practice measurably reduces amygdala volume and increases PFC thickness. Slow, controlled breathing, especially 4 to 6 breaths per minute. Cognitive reframing. Challenging interpretations reduces amygdala firing in real time. Regular aerobic exercise increases prefrontal cortex blood flow and connectivity. These aren't vague wellness ideas. They show up in fMRI studies. fMRIs are magnetic resonance imaging of the brain. Lowering baseline stress reduces amygdala sensitivity. A chronically stressed brain becomes hypervigilant. The amygdala grows more reactive, and the PFC becomes less effective. What lowers baseline stress physiology? Consistent sleep. Sleep deprivation increases amygdala reactivity by up to 60%. Daily physical activity reduces cortisol and increases resilience. Reducing stimulants when anxious. Caffeine amplifies threat perception. Exposure to nature. Lower sympathetic nervous system activity. When your baseline stress drops, your threshold for threat rises. Reinterpreting threat retrains the amygdala. So stress drops, then you have a higher threshold for threat. Interesting. Reinterpreting threat retrains the amygdala. The amygdala learns from experience. If you repeatedly reinterpret ambiguous situations as non-threatening, the amygdala updates its model. This is the core of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, exposure therapy, and emotional regulation training. The mechanism. When you reinterpret a situation, maybe they weren't attacking me. The PFC overrides the amygdala. Over time, the amygdala stops firing as intensely in similar situations. Gradual exposure reduces hypersensitivity. Avoidance teaches the amygdala that something is dangerous. Exposure teaches it that it's not. Examples: listening to mild criticism without defending yourself. Reading opinions you disagree with. practicing difficult conversations in low-stakes settings. Each exposure is a recalibration rep. Body-based techniques directly calm the amygdala. These work because the amygdala is tightly linked to the autonomic nervous system. Effective techniques. Long exhale breathing activates the vagus nerve. Progressive muscle relaxation. Cold exposure to the face stimulates the mammalian dive reflex. Grounding techniques. Orienting to sensory input reduces limbic activation. These don't require thinking. They change physiology directly. Building self-worth reduces perceived threat. So the higher self-worth, it kind of implies the higher self-worth you feel, the less you'll feel offended. The amygdala reacts strongly when something feels like a threat to identity or ego. The more secure you feel internally, the less external comments trigger you. Ways to build this: confidence building, skills and mastery, self-respect rituals, journaling, affirming actions, spending time with people who treat you well, reducing environments that reward outrage or insecurity. A secure identity is naturally less reactive. Social connection reduces amygdala activation. Loneliness increases amygdala sensitivity. Warm social connection decreases it. Even one supportive friend, a meaningful conversation, a sense of belonging can reduce threat perception. Over time, the brain physically changes. This is the part most people underestimate. Repeated emotional regulation shrinks amygdala volume, thickens the prefrontal cortex, strengthens PFC amygdala connectivity, lowers baseline cortisol, increases emotional resilience. You're not just coping better, you're literally rewiring your threat circuitry. So we'll stop there, but so anyway, there's kind of been, like I said, there's been several instances in my life where I'm kind of, I think my brain is kind of wired to look for humor in the world, and not everybody's brains are wired like that. Some people some people can take offense to, I might be more wired to take offense to humor, and so anyway, just kind of something that I was thinking about this past week, and I guess there's kind of, everybody brings different cards to the table, and everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and anyway, I think it's just kind of good to think of just kind of went over some ways to not get offended so easily, and how to just decrease the amygdala activity, and some different ideas that the AI suggested. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful in some way. Hope you're enjoying your day.